Okay, what is the worst thing about being a runner? I was asked this yesterday, and it's quite a fun question because I often get asked the other way, what are the great things about running and what are the great things about being a runner? And I'll often rave on this channel about the brilliant things about running and being a runner. But what is the answer to what is the worst thing? It took me some time to think about this, and then I was sort of pushed for an answer. And the only answer that I can give is this, and I guess it's more of a reflective Friday, but when you go from doing something as a hobby, doing something for fun, and you quickly try to change that into a profession, into something that you're getting paid for, then all of a sudden, yeah, it reframes itself as this is your source of income and this is what you're working for, and therefore much worse to have an injury or much worse to be sidelined through illness. And so you start to look at things a lot more detailed like that, which for me was a good thing. I started to be much more methodical with my training. And again, with illness, you start to look around you. You start to be that person on a flight that's wearing a mask way before COVID, that doesn't want to touch door handles because of germs, because of the potential illness. You get to that point where you become quite freaky with stuff like that. But that's not the worst thing. For me, the worst thing was you've made something that was a hobby, was a fun thing to do, that a lot of people do for recreation, that is absolutely a fun thing. You made that into something that's now very, very serious. And in order to be good at that, especially as a European and a non-African, in order to compete at that to a point where somebody will pay you in order to do what you previously loved, and for me still loved, and still to this day loved, it meant that I needed to guard that goal with my life. And what I mean by that, and what that then looks like to the outside world and to everybody else, because people do not understand this. You guys might understand it a lot more because you've got something in running that you want to protect, and maybe that's like 30 minutes or 60 minutes per day that you protect. But what it meant for me is I needed to guard not just my training, but you very quickly realize that you become not just a professional runner, but mostly a professional recoverer. And therefore your time and your downtime is incredibly important. So what it makes you is incredibly selfish. And you're not then a good friend, or you're not able to be the friend that you was before because you're protecting something. And in the beginning for me, that wasn't winning big races or winning any kind of races. That was just me trying to perform, get on the podium, please sponsors and people that were invested in you. So when you're protecting something that is also still in its infancy of what it can be in that professional running career, then you're protecting something that doesn't really bring in a lot on the other side in terms of money, and therefore it's just at that time your dream, your belief in yourself, that you have that potential to be good, so long as that you give it the right amount of time. And we're talking years, not months. And so eventually that comes, but right from the start you have to guard your time with your life, and therefore you have to be incredibly selfish. Come here, come here. Do you want to get on the camera? There you go. There you go. Hey, you're on the camera. And I'll give you some examples. My best friend got married in the UK. I remember when he called me and told me that he was getting married and he wanted me to be the best man at his wedding. My first thought, and I still regret this first thought, but it was the natural first thought, was, does the date of his marriage, does that work for my training schedule and my racing schedule? That was my first thought. Very quickly you can kind of correct your thinking and think, of course, that's way more important than any race that I'd be doing, and how selfish of me to think that way. But you're in that mentality, that mindset, that is a problem. It's an obstacle that I need to navigate, and hopefully I can fit it into my diary. But the first thought is, how can I get out of it, or how can I work it around my racing and training schedule? And so you don't like that stuff about yourself. And I guess that's the stuff that I love in sports documentaries. Like when we saw The Last Dance, and when we saw The Edge of Everything with Ronnie O'Sullivan, the snooker player, you saw behind the scenes of a character that you had wanted to be for a long time. You want to be that person in his glory moments. You want to be Tiger Woods when he's hitting great shots and when he's winning tournaments. Michael Jordan is exactly the same. But the rest of the personality that comes with that is so blinkered, so tunnel visioned, that do you want to be that person? And what you got, or what I got from The Last Dance, what I knew already was I want to be Michael Jordan for 5% of the time. When he's on the court and he's hitting that winning shot at the buzzer, do I want him to be him the rest of the time when he's so competitive with himself that he's, you know, playing with security people with pennies against the wall, when he's competing for massive amounts of money on the golf course and he can't enjoy that day because, or maybe he gets the enjoyment from the competition and the bets, but he wants to win at all costs. And we saw exactly the same with Lance Armstrong. So you get an insight into that personality. You'll see it with Cristiano Ronaldo. I'm sure he's exactly the same. But when you're at that level and you're playing in a sport that is already incredibly entertaining and therefore will pay the athlete a lot of money, it's much easier to justify it. Like if you're Ronaldo and you're bringing, what, $1 million a week in, then it's very easy to justify you jumping in the ice bath every single morning, you having a personal chef who's putting everything out and you're eating exactly the same diet day after day after day. Your family are much more willing to fit into that schedule because of what that means for his career. It's very different when you're a runner. This may not for you be a profession yet. This may be you just getting out there and getting the miles in, going for long runs, doing an interval session, coming home, you're exhausted, making sure the right foods are stocked, and then also the smoothies, the recovery shakes and everything else that comes into it, the foam rolling, the strength sessions, trying to fit that around your busy life as it is. How can you then justify being away for 2-3 hours on a Sunday to do your long run? And so we all encounter this at some level, and it's probably an element of our life that we either don't like about ourselves or we've learned to live with. But everyone talks about balance. And essentially, if you're 40 years old, you've got a couple of children, you've got a high pressure career, and you're doing well in your career, and then you want to fit in marathon training, there's a lot of things moving around there that is absolutely impossible. And this is the conclusion that I've come to. It's absolutely impossible to be firing on all cylinders, to be a 10 out of 10 in every department of your life at all times. What definitely takes over for many people is obviously children number one. You hear that a lot, children number one. But unless you take care of your work, and that is still not just taking along, but you're still there for your employer if you're employed, then there's not going to be food on the table for the children. And then that area of your life is kind of not working. So then if you try to insert a hobby at the same time, and it might be something like running, which you get that mental escape and you can go and be in your own thoughts and start to solve some of those problems, then maybe there's not the justification for you to be out there a long time in order to fix that. So your relationship needs to be solid. So what is the worst thing about being a runner? For me, it was when I turned that into a professional gig, when I turned it into a professional career, and when I had to be so serious about it in order to compete. And maybe some of that is fear and a lack of trust in the process that actually you're doing enough and the training's good enough and therefore you can be racing. But there's always a part of you that's wondering, what are your competitors doing? And are they doing more than you? And so, yeah, I wanted to talk about that today because it was such an interesting question yesterday, and it's not often talked about. Maybe the sacrifice of the amount of time that you put into running if you want to be good and if you want to get to a point where you're hitting your targets, maybe that becomes a factor for a portion of the year for some people. For most of us, it's a year-round thing where we're constantly trying to juggle our running, our sport life, our gym life, our strength and recovery and everything else that comes with becoming a good runner with the rest of life.